Can we just start out with you telling us a little bit about where you are on your life journey at this moment in time?
I've been an entrepreneur for almost 10 years. I started my own business, Storybeat Studio.
Was it a difficult transition going into business for yourself?
I think I listened to too many voices that were telling me, giving me different advice. And I learned so much about who to listen to.
If you had to choose between happiness or success, which would you choose?
For me, happiness is success.
What advice do you have for people who are trying to figure out what to do with their lives?
Yeah, listen to yourself. Surround yourself with people that are willing to tell you the truth.
Welcome to 101 Ways Out. I'm your host, Vanessa. Today, we are joined by a true master storyteller, Lisa Weiss. Lisa is the founder of Storybeat Studios, but her journey to entrepreneurship began at the very top of television. She has an incredible background as an Emmy-winning producer and journalist. In this episode, we explore Lisa's path from working on The Jenny Jones Show, CBS News, and The Oprah Winfrey Show to navigating the uncertainty of layoffs and starting a business while pregnant. We discuss how she learned to trust her own voice and the realities of having to leave a dream job, and how she found a new personal definition of success. I'm so excited to share this conversation with you. Let's dive in. Lisa, thank you so much for being here. Can we just start out with you telling us a little bit about where you are on your life journey at this moment in time?
Thank you so much for having me, Vanessa. I'm excited to talk about this. So where I am in my journey right now is I have been an entrepreneur for almost 10 years. I started my own business, Storybeat Studio, and officially it was 2018, but I started consulting in 2015 and really established it as an actual corporation in 2018. But it has been almost 10 years of entrepreneurship. So that's
amazing.
where I'm at. Yeah, just kind of an exciting time for me, establishing the business and celebrating almost 10 years.
Yeah, congratulations. It's really interesting. On this show, I get to talk to people that are just about to take the leap and, somewhere in the middle, and then people like you that have been running their businesses for quite a while. So it's nice to kind of see the different evolutions that people go through. And obviously nothing is a straight line. So there are many roller coaster moments along the way. So hopefully we'll get to talk about some of that too, considering you've been on your path for a while. But let's go back in time to when you were a little girl. Can you share with us what your upbringing was like?
Sure, that's a great question that I don't think about a lot, but so I had a first generation American father so I had sort of an immigrant influence in my household. I had very present grandparents who were just very present, loomed large, and were very meaningful in our lives. So that relationship was always really important. So I always had a lot of respect for my elders and sort of an entrepreneurial spirit in the house too. My grandfather had tried to be an entrepreneur, tried to open a little mom and pop grocery store, but hadn't been successful in it. And so we had entrepreneurial experiences in our past that I was raised with, and sort of knowing that they had struggled and that it was not always an easy path. But I knew about that from a young age. I would say, like many raised in the 70s and 80s, when I was raised on Generation X, I was pretty unsupervised, so I had a lot of opportunities to play outside and experiment and be really creative and not have anyone telling me, sort of helicopter parenting me at all. And so I spent a lot of time outside in the yard on roller skates, roller skating around the block with friends and doing creative things with my sister. I have an older sister, and we enjoyed making jewelry and selling it from a young age, and sort of trying to figure out little ways to make money even as a kid so we could buy more beads and make more jewelry. And yeah, it's a very intergenerational life, I would say.
Oh, I love that. That's really amazing. Where did your family move to the U.S. from?
My father's side came from Hungary and Czechoslovakia, which is now the Czech Republic. That's where they were from. So, and they fled the Holocaust and came in late 1930s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So just right around that time. And so, yeah, just didn't speak much English at all, very little, my grandfather at least. And then my grandmother, they were all often, speaking in different languages in their home and around us. So just exposed
That's
to
amazing.
yeah, it was always fun. I always really enjoyed that.
I remember learning that you and your sister were doing the handcrafted jewelry, did you realize at that time that that was kind of an early glimpse into your entrepreneurial spirit, or did you not really see it that way?
I don't know where it came from. I sort of have to wonder because I think that the influence of my family, kind of the struggle to make money that they had, I think creative pursuits had to be, maybe had to be monetized. I don't know where that came from, that we did sell it, because we could have also just made it and given it to friends, but we did try to sell it at art fairs. And I'm not quite sure when I think about it now, where the idea for actually selling it came from, that you couldn't just do something just to do it. Or was it my idea? I'll never know. But I do know that we did try to sell it, and we did sell it at art fairs. And that was fun. It was fun because it was always nice to see how people react and see and make things that people liked. And I don't know if they just put pity on us because we were little kids and they bought our jewelry. But it was fun to see that and see how the audience or the customer reacted. So I did.
That's amazing, Lisa. Yeah. I love that insight too, that because I feel like that's something that I have often had conversations with my husband about. It's like, how do you create art just for art versus something that you want to sell? And where does that desire to sell come from versus just creating art for your own personal like enjoyment? So I love that you went there because I wasn't even thinking about that. That's so interesting.
Yeah, it's just something that occurred to me when you asked me that question, that I was thinking about it, that I can't answer that. I'll never know. But I'm able to unpack it now and think about it for whatever I'm doing now. I can think about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about your parents? Kind of what were their careers like, and what kind of expectations do you feel they had for you as you were growing up?
My father was a CPA, a certified public accountant, and he loved math. He was sort of a math whiz. It was really interesting. And he also was pretty much a professional poker player. So he was, he did that as well. And my mother she worked part-time. She was more of a homemaker, sort of more traditional family, had an intact family, a mother and a father that stayed married, and they were married for 52 years until my father passed away. So I was raised with that sort of, that intact family and sort of middle-class existence, where they bought a white house in the suburbs of Chicago, just outside Chicago, in a city called Evanston, Illinois. But yeah, just to, sort of more or less stable. My father worked a lot. It was really important to him to work really hard and to make a living for the family and to never kind of put us in a position that he had been in growing up. He really wanted to provide for us and make sure we always had food on the table and didn't struggle to, buy clothes or food. So that was really important to both of them.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. And what about your experiences as a child? Was there anything that you feel like you remember now that really shaped who you became?
One of the things with my father relates to a project that I've been working on for years, is that when I was a little girl, my father showed me a little cigar box filled with toys that were his when he was a little boy because they couldn't afford toys. And he showed me his little cigar box filled with toys and these little treasures that he loved. And he was able to buy me toys. And so it was this really big contrast. And, what he had versus what my parents were able to provide for me. And he just had, everything in his little cigar box was a giveaway. It was a free toy pulled from a cereal box. And he just treasured them. He loved his little toys. And that just stuck with me. Just the appreciation for anything you have, whatever it is, even if you just have one thing that you can call your own, to appreciate it. So I've always felt a real gratitude for anything that I'm able to have. And I don't want to take things for granted. So that definitely shaped me from a young age, just kind of having that. My father used to remind me a lot, like if we buy something, he'd always say, kind of like the traditional old school parent, like, when I was a kid, we couldn't afford that. When I was a kid, we didn't have that. So that always inspired to me to appreciate things. But it worked. It was effective, and I did appreciate.
Oh, that's great. Is there anything else that stands out to you from childhood?
And how I was raised and who I am now. I think I was always a really creative child. I was always really imaginative, as all children are. And I loved that about my life as a kid, that I could sort of be imaginative. But I think that was not something that was necessarily valued in my household, because it wasn't something that could provide for you. So I wasn't really able to focus on a lot of those things, I would say. And so I think that as a 49-year-old turning 50, it's something that I examine a lot and think about. And I've tried to weave into my life when I became an adult, just to make more time for creativity and allow for things that aren't always a clear path to monetization, that some things might surprise you and actually become lucrative, or at least make some money to support yourself. But other things you don't, I like the idea of having the freedom to create in whatever we can, even if it's just 5 minutes, if we can find any time for that. So, because that wasn't necessarily something that was prized or allowed. My parents didn't have access to that. So that was the other thing. They didn't have access to it. That wasn't something available to them.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. So as you were getting older, high school, college, what kind of expectations did your parents set for you? I mean, clearly the idea of just being creative and artistic and stuff was not a priority, but what kind of things did they instill that was important?
I used to say I wanted to be a doctor. I think it came from my family because of that sort of immigrant family, the idea of be a doctor. That was the number one thing. I think lawyer would have been interesting too to them, but doctor was the number one thing that was sort of always, that was the theme. And my father isn't allowed to defend himself anymore. So he would say, oh, we never said that. But somehow I got that message that I needed to be a doctor. So I always thought I needed to be a doctor. My older sister did become a doctor, but I didn't. I went to college. I was really fortunate to get to go to college, and I studied pre-med for the first couple of years, but I just kept falling asleep on my books. I didn't even do particularly well. I never liked it at all. It was not for me. And so I was taking English literature classes while I was pre-med, thinking maybe I can major in English and study pre-med. And I just loved it. I wanted to get a PhD.
So great.
It was so exciting to me. And I wanted to get an MFA, but that wasn't something that really seemed practical. So I did end up becoming an English major, which was really exciting. And I thought I could still apply to medical school. But at some point I realized, I saw an ad actually back then there were little bulletin boards, and there was an internship at a local news station for a news writing intern. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. It kind of brings together what I want to do. This is a real career. At the time, that was a really promising career. And so I pulled this little ad off of a bulletin board and got a job as an intern at a local news station in St. Louis and became a news writing intern. And it was incredible. And I loved it. It just lit me up in a million different ways. And that was sort of what set me on a path of becoming a writer, a producer, a journalist, a storyteller.
That's so amazing. I'm like listening to your story right now, and I'm sort of envious because I loved English literature, and I started my college career double majoring in English and computer information systems. And then I dropped but I liked both. Both were great, right? But I dropped the English side because I realized like there's really no overlap and I can make more money in computers. And so let me go down that path, So that was my logic at the time. But I'm hearing you and I'm like, oh, that sounds so fulfilling and so rewarding and so fun. That's so cool.
It was, I was lucky because I knew I needed something practical where I could have a job and get a paycheck. That was sort of what was instilled in me. And so the fact that I found that on the bulletin board, because my other path that I wanted to follow would have never happened at that time. Going back to get a PhD or an MFA, that was not at all. So, right, because who doesn't want, a lot of us want to read books all day and learn, but that's not practical. Like you chose your path and you were great at both and interested in both. So yeah, and that's why it's also never too late. And we can also pursue these things on our own terms, in our own way, which I personally never made time for when I was working full time for other people. I didn't make time to sort of write or, I hardly even read outside of work because I was working so many hours. There wasn't as much time. So, but now I've made that such a priority to just do the things that I like to do.
I love that.
Even if
my
it's
gosh,
not
I
a
love that.
career. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I know you worked at Harpo Studios for 17 years. And I know you thought at some point, I'm getting this right, that you were going to spend another 20 years there.
I was at Harpo for 7, and I was in the industry for 18 years. So I worked, so I worked at a lot of different organizations over the years. I worked at CBS News. I worked for Oprah twice, and I worked for some other shows too, sprinkled in there, basically what people might call trash talk shows too. That's how I got my start, was after working at a local news station in St. Louis. I answered another ad that was sort of, didn't have details about what it was, but it said local talk show in Chicago hiring production assistants. And I answered an ad thinking, oh, this could be the Oprah show, or this could, I don't know what this is. There were several talk shows in Chicago. This ended up being a show called The Jenny Jones Show, which was a talk show kind of like Jerry Springer and sort of infamous in its own way. But I ended up having, I still feel, an incredible experience working there and learned a ton and met people who later on, my boss who I met Brian Petrovich there, who ended up hiring me. I worked for him at Jenny Jones, and then he later worked for Oprah, and he called me and invited me to interview at the Oprah show. So my contacts at the Jenny Jones show, where I was for 5 years, ended up being incredibly foundational for the remainder of my career, which ended up lifting me up in a lot of ways. So
I remember the Jenny Jones show. I watched that show when I was younger. I remember that. It's so amazing that you worked there.
Yeah, it's, in some ways, it's sort of hard to look back on. It was sort of a moral conundrum in a lot of ways, a moral quandary. I mean, it was more of like, it was human lives, and we were telling their stories and they were revealing them on a show. And it was just something that I worked there, and I tried to carve out a different role for myself at the show, sort of like a research role. And I tried to bring on different experts in industries and have them come on and sort of give counseling and give out advice. I was trying to sort of provide some positivity and repair in the environment that we were in. So in some way, I just kind of didn't really, I was like a sore thumb in some ways, like, what am I doing here? But it ended up being personally a good experience. I can't say, it's hard to say how I feel about the work.
Yeah.
Right. But you're not asking that, thank goodness.
No, but I hear you. I feel like a lot of times we end up in situations where we would make different decisions if we were in control of that environment.
I think back then, just being pretty young, I wanted experience. I wanted to become a producer. I was very me focused. I was very much like, I need to learn skills. I need to be a producer. And I wasn't thinking as much. Look, I tried to work for the Oprah show at the time. I applied. I didn't get an interview. I didn't know anyone. I applied everywhere. I applied anywhere I could to try to get a job. But I was also kind of a Midwestern girl and I didn't have my full courage yet to leave the Chicago area. So I was kind of keeping it close. So I was thinking, oh, the Oprah show would be amazing.
Yeah.
And then then these other opportunities locally were more available. And so I was thinking about, how can I build my skills? And I wasn't thinking about removing myself and going to New York, or I wasn't thinking about, this pipeline of talent that existed mostly, not as much for women, but more for men, going to LA and writing for sitcoms or writing for, or working in movies and development executive, those kinds of things. I wasn't thinking about that at that time.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was the baby stuff for me.
It's interesting then, because it sounds like at some point that did become something that was on your radar. So I'm really curious about, you're saying you weren't thinking about it at the time, but then it sounds like maybe it did become something you were thinking about. But before I ask you that question, I always wondered on the shows like the Jenny Jones show, how much because now, we have all these reality TV shows. I always wondered, like, how much of that is real versus how much of that is just for TV. But it sounds like from your experience, it may have been more real than just for TV.
Right. And I wasn't as, I was more of a researcher. I was more involved. I wasn't as much involved in the production of people's stories, but I believe they were real. They were real people. And I actually took calls. My first job was taking phone calls from callers who wanted to be on the show, and they would call in on a specific topic, and they were real. They were, I would listen to them kind of talk about their story, and I would take notes. And so I do remember that, of listening to them and talking to them. And, I do. I mean, it wasn't a news. This was not a journalist. This was not a product of journalism. So it's not like multiple, some sources were checked, but I'm saying it didn't hold it. It wasn't held to that standard of that journalism is held to. So
it's interesting. Is that how the majority of the guests were discovered, or was it more through research?
Oftentimes, sometimes it was research. It depends on the show. I mean, that show was mostly driven by callers who called in
Interesting.
and wanted to be on the show for a particular topic, but different shows that were more topical and more research driven and more journalistic were done more, with research. But we did have guests that we researched, like we did shows, all kinds of shows. And some were more research driven, but the majority of the shows were, general population people calling in and wanting to be on the show and kind of getting through the vetting process with producers and appearing. So.
Yeah. Oh, it's so interesting. What a different life. Like I've never, ever been in that world. So it's really interesting to hear you talk about it. It's like a whole different lens is opening up. So you transitioned from Jenny Jones to Oprah, or did you have something else in between?
I had some things in between, actually.
Yeah.
It was sort of a climb. The whole thing was sort of a climb, and realizing that I could leave Chicago. I had an opportunity not long after the Jenny Jones show. I worked for a couple of different other programs. I worked for freelance for HGTV and the Food Network. And then I had an opportunity to move. I lived in Chicago and worked on another show, and then I had the opportunity to be transferred to LA, which I fought for. I really wanted to move to LA and have that opportunity. I sort of reached the point where I had enough courage to realize I could do that. And I wanted to. So I moved to Los Angeles and worked there for several years. And then after that, an opportunity came up where I got to move to Boston and work for a flagship PBS station, which I had always admired, called WGBH in Boston. And they were doing a science-based, National Science Foundation funded show for kids, which was really amazing. And so I worked on that. And that was a short contract. And while I was there, it was only a year. And while I was there, I got the call from my former colleague at the Jenny Jones show who said they were looking for a strong researcher at the Oprah show for a project they were working on. And it wasn't even on my radar anymore because I'd applied years ago and not gotten a response from the Oprah show. But now that my former boss from the Jenny Jones show was working there and remembered my work from the time we worked together, he called me back and said that they were looking for someone and would I be interested? And so I remember them flying me out and putting me up in a hotel, and it was all so exciting. And I went through a really rigorous interview process and had the opportunity to work on a documentary about Oprah's school in South Africa. So she built a school in South Africa, and I worked on that documentary. So that was my first experience working for the Oprah show. It was a sort of a freelance full-time position where I dipped my toe in the Harpo Studios way and their methods and their culture. And I had this amazing opportunity.
Oh, that's so interesting. I have to ask you, was it a difficult decision? You had finally gone out to LA and gotten that experience. Was it difficult to decide to leave LA, or were you ready?
I did not want to leave LA. I loved being there. I loved waking up every morning and seeing the sunshine every morning. It was an incredible privilege to live there. I remember thinking, this is like heaven for a Midwestern person raised in Chicago, where it gets to be, 10, 20, 10 degrees below zero in the winter. And people, in LA, you just wear like a light jacket. And the sunshine every morning was unbelievable. The work environment of having so many different productions at the time that were available. And it's sort of a mecca for people who worked in writing and producing content, television, movies, film. And so, I loved being there. But I had I was sort of going for the opportunities and the projects. And the best project that came up was this NSF funded show in Boston. And I always liked Boston. So I thought I'll just move, and actually just kept my things in storage thinking I'd move back to LA. So I was planning to move back to Los Angeles after Boston. And then I got the call to move back to Chicago. I would say the hardest thing was moving back to Chicago. Even though it was for the Oprah show, I didn't want to live in Chicago again. I wanted to stay. I wanted to live on one of the coasts and live where television at the time was thriving, where it was really a lot was going on. There were so many opportunities. So that was the hardest part, was making the sacrifice to move back to Chicago.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. I am from San Antonio and moved away to New York for several years. And then we moved back to San Antonio. And I just remember that decision to move back was so hard because it's like, it's not at the coast. Like you said, I mean, in technology, there's not nearly as much going on, but it was also like, well, there was a good opportunity there. And it was for that time in our life, we were, it was just, it seemed like the right thing to do. But it is worrisome because you just never know what comes next. I don't know. I'm a worrier, so I worry about everything, So, like, yes, I get where you're coming from. You're like, oh, but it's Chicago, and I'm from Chicago, and I'm doing these other things in these big cities, and these, it's exciting.
Right.
So you move
wanna
back.
have
Yeah.
you want to have options, I think.
Right.
Don't want to feel like you don't have any options, because I think I read about your values, and one of my values too is freedom. Freedom for myself,
Yes.
freedom for others. And when you feel like you're working with the only game in town, you can feel, even if it's an amazing game, if it's wonderful, it's something you really want and strive for, it still can kind of make you feel, as a worrier, like I am, you want to be protected. You like having options.
Yes. Yes. 100%.
Mm-hmm.
So then what happened after that first project, with Harpo? What did you do next?
After Harpo, so that was about a year, and I had the opportunity to work full time at Harpo, and I was going to stay, but then we were kind of going back and forth. And this is such a long story. I wasn't. Yeah, I ended up taking a job in New York at CBS News. So I loved being at Harpo, but I think I'd always wanted to be in New York, and this opportunity came up, and I moved. So I moved to New York actually for several years. and worked for CBS News. At the time, they had a morning show that was competing and trying to get away from being number 3, perennially number 3 in the morning show ratings, which at the time, this was being tracked. Now this is all so irrelevant. Nobody even thinks about the morning shows and television, but back then it's, NBC, ABC, and CBS was always in third place for the morning show and news. And I was excited about the idea of being able to help a team that was trying to win. And I was really excited about that. So I worked on that show for about 3 years. And then this was towards the end of the Oprah show, when it was coming to a close. And then my former boss from Oprah called me back, and we kept in touch, and they had an opportunity for me to work on the final season of the Oprah Winfrey show, which was just a once in a lifetime opportunity. And so I decided, it was really tough decision. I decided to move back to Chicago. Also, this was the time, just to be clear, working in news in New York, and particularly in the environment I was working, was not an easy environment for me, for a lot of people. And so escaping to work for Oprah again felt really exciting and comforting. So I did that. I took that job, and that ended up becoming another 6 years of work with Oprah. So it was an incredible run, and just unbelievable, because it was the time when the Oprah show was ending and a new chapter was beginning. She was opening up a network and doing her own thing completely outside of the legacy work that she'd made with the Oprah Winfrey show, which went on for 25 years. After that, she was creating something totally new and entrepreneurial. And I was part of that. So that was really exciting, helping her build a new dream.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's also great to hear that you had the chance to live and work in both coasts and kind of the major cities, and have that experience and explore all of that. And then be able to come back and have that really incredible experience launching that network.
Yeah, it was nice. And I was really lucky to have a wonderful boss and mentor, a woman named Jill Barancic, who helped me, who hired me, who gave me a chance and brought me on to help her team and build this show called Super Soul Sunday, which we didn't know what it was going to be, because everything was sort of being built from scratch. So we had the opportunity to envision what that show would be. And just a really creative, fun, totally entrepreneurial time. Because when you're starting something, when you have something that's sort of legacy work, that's a well-oiled machine for 25 years, and it's just brilliant work, and you're kind of coming into that, which I came into it so late versus other people who'd worked there for so long, and then learning their methods and their ways. And then also applying the entrepreneurial mindset to build something new with the network. So that was a really great experience to be a part of and to start new shows that were a different vision for her, that were sort of offshoots of what she had started before.
Yeah. So how many, I guess if you, I don't even know if you would think about it this way, but this is how my mind works because there's shows, there's specific different pieces of creative. Did you work on a lot of different projects like that at the network?
Initially, when I was working for the network, we worked on pitches. I helped with several different pitches that we pitched to try to make into shows. And then initially, we brought a team together to create a new project, and we didn't know what it was going to be. And that's what ended up being Super Soul Sunday. So it really sort of started out with a bunch of different potential, tentacles and things that we're working on. And then it sort of filtered into what was approved and what we ended up building. So Super Soul Sunday became the main focus after the early stages of the pitch process and working through what all the different options of what it could be.
So what was Super Soul Sundays all about?
So Super Soul Sunday was sort of different experts, authors. It was also a continuation of Oprah's book club. So we did interviews with authors it was mostly fiction, but sometimes I think it would sprinkle in nonfiction. So Cheryl Strayed's Wild. So we would do, it was a conversation show. It was sort of an interview show, really interesting, in-depth conversation with people that Oprah wanted to talk to. So it was really driven by her own curiosity and interesting voices that she wanted to share. And it's still a podcast, and it's part of just the spirit of the work. I'm just discovering or amplifying interesting voices that she loves. And so oftentimes it was, authors, sometimes nonfiction, practical nonfiction. It would sort of, sometimes it was spiritual too. And that was so different for me because I would never have called myself a spiritual person at all. And so that part of it was a total awakening for me and ended up being really eye-opening. But the idea behind it was that she would have thought-provoking guests that would get people's minds, sort of open people's minds.
No, it's
Hearts
so neat.
too, and eyes to different ideas.
Yeah.
Some of which were totally different and foreign for me. So like Eckhart Tolle, I hadn't heard of him. There were a lot of sort of spiritual authors, learning. John Kabat-Zinn ended up being one of my favorites. He was really interesting, bringing meditation from a medical perspective. And so I learned a lot about meditation and the scientific benefits of it, which I was totally closed to before.
Yeah, that's amazing. Oh my gosh. The meditation piece, I didn't start, and I'm not perfect. I mean, I come and go with this practice, but I didn't start meditating until probably 2019. Because I had a coach that was telling me that he thinks it's just so game changing. And he's like, you should try it. And I'm like, all right. I mean, it always sounded kind of hokey, but I'll give it a try. And I did find it to be really, really helpful, and then it became something that I was really interested in for a while. So I love that that's an example that you just used. And I think for you also, because there was a scientific aspect to it that probably, since you weren't a spiritual person, that probably helped you be more open to it, maybe,
It did, absolutely, because there were other meditation teachers that we talked to that for me, just I felt blocked. And so I really liked his approach for me. And I learned a lot from it. So absolutely. And then I still have a really hard time meditating. I still sort of have a resistance, even though I know that the data is there, that is proven. I just have a really hard time dedicating 10 or 20 minutes, for example, twice a day, because we learned transcendental meditation when I was working there too. And so working, giving up 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the evening just feels like such an incredible investment of time. But the argument was always, you can't, if you don't spend that time, you're basically like, you need it more than anybody who thinks they don't have the time needs it more than anyone else. Like when you don't think you have it, you need it the most. So that was sort of the pushback. But yeah, I still struggle with my meditation.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. So at what point did you transition away from working on that show and working on the Oprah content?
So in 2015, around, I think it was spring of 2015, we were I was still working for Super Soul Sunday, and there was an announcement that came out that Oprah was going to would possibly close the studios in Chicago. And I didn't know what would happen, but she did end up closing the studios in Chicago. And so hundreds of people were laid off, including
Oh,
me.
yeah.
And and so I had a son at the time. I had a 1-year-old. Now, during this, and I should probably say, and because this is so much of a focus of your work, when I was working for Super Soul Sunday, I don't think I was quite 40 yet. I think I was 39, maybe. And I had one child. I got married later in life. And all of this, I believe, happened because of my experience working for Oprah. My life completely changed. I changed in a lot of ways. But once I had a son, he was 1, and the entire staff got laid off. And there was potentially, I guess, an opportunity to move back to California for people that maybe there was. I'm not sure. I didn't really explore it, but I was actually pregnant at the time. I ended up later miscarrying, unfortunately, but I was newly pregnant when I found out that the studio was closing. And it sort of shocked me, because I thought to myself, I just didn't, in the industry that I'd worked in, there were so few women leaders who had families. And I didn't have a lot of examples to turn to. And I thought that there was no way I could get another job working the way that I did, working long hours, weekends, doing whatever it took to continue to contribute to that industry while I was pregnant. I didn't think anybody would hire me. I just didn't think I would have an opportunity to get a job. And so I think at that point, I realized that I had to and I'd always been entrepreneurial. I had always created things from the ground up, built shows over the years, helped get things off the ground. And so I had that innate ability and had used that skill multiple times. So I don't know if it's interesting because I think it's partially just the mind sort of telling me. I didn't even necessarily look at data on whether a pregnant woman in the entertainment industry could get a job, but I just felt that it wasn't going to happen. And there wasn't a ton of proof. I mean, most women had experiences where they didn't get the job, but anecdotally that I would hear about, that wasn't something that was very fruitful for them. But I didn't even pursue it. So I knew that I had to start something at that time. I felt like I have to start something for myself and build something. Also, I think when you lose something that really matters to you, for me, I loved my job. I absolutely loved my work. I loved working on the show. I loved everything about it. And when you realize that you don't have control, that things can change. And of course, now that I've been an entrepreneur for as long as I have, I know that the markets can change. Everything can change for us regardless. But the idea of working for someone else and having a layoff happen, for me, that was enough to say, I don't want to do this ever again. I don't want to deal with it. I just want to build something for myself that I have control over, that I can follow the trends. I can follow the markets. I can see what customers are buying and what they're not for myself and make those determinations and not have to be at the mercy of another organization that has complete control over my
Absolutely.
job.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. That's so interesting. And it does feel like having a child, especially in this example, and trying to get a job as a pregnant person in an industry that's so challenging. I mean, I understand exactly where you're coming from. My kid is 8 now, but I remember interviewing when I was pregnant. And this company was based in Dallas, Texas. And I had to keep flying up there for all of these interviews. It was the most insane series of interviews. And I was very early in my pregnancy when I started the interview process. And then I kept going up and I kept getting these like bigger and bigger jackets and just trying to hide it. I was like, oh my God, I'm never going to get an offer there. It's obvious. Like it became so obvious that I was pregnant, but I was so afraid, that I had a job. I was fine, at that point, but it is something that like, I remember taking my wedding ring off when I used to interview for jobs because people don't want to hire someone that's married because that person then might have a baby. And then they don't think you're reliable. They don't know that you're going to come back to work. They don't think you're going to prioritize your job. So very much understand where you're coming from with all of those thoughts.
Yeah,
So
and it was that fear. It was also that fear that I think made me not even pursue having a family or getting married for a long time. I was in my late 30s when I took that path. And because career was more important to me, it was something that I really was focused. I was hyper focused on my career. I wasn't really thinking about anything else. I was myopic. That was it. I wasn't thinking about family or settling down in any way, and I'm still not, that's not, settling down is never going to be my approach. But even just, marriage or any traditional life, that was not something I was thinking about, anything traditional. So
Wasn't a goal.
no, it wasn't. I just happened to have met somebody who I loved, and that's what we decided to do. But it was completely serendipitous that it happened, because that was not on my radar and that wasn't part of my plans. So, but I think part of it was because I was so myopic and so focused on career, and I knew how difficult it would make my career choice. I knew that it would make it harder. I'd seen so many different, friends and how hard it was. So I had a good sense of what it was like to balance.
Yeah, absolutely. So then so this layoff happened, you're pregnant, you're going to have this kiddo, and you realize I should do it. I should do my own business. Like, what was that decision-making process like, and how did you go about it?
I reserved a website. I bought a domain. I thought about what it should be. It was sort of the easiest possible thing at the time. It was Lisa Weiss Media, which is now looking back, and I knew it not long after, it was not a good idea to name something just after yourself. And you need that was not the right approach, but I did that. I reserved the name, the website, and I started kind of putting it out there that I was taking consulting clients. And it was interesting. I got really lucky because I did get right away. I got a really high profile client that came my way. It was interesting too, though, because in the beginning there, it doesn't happen now, but in the beginning, people would reach out to me because they wanted to be a guest or be interviewed by Oprah. And so I thought they wanted to hire me as a consultant, and they did, but that was sort of like an underlying part of it. And I can't be hired to get somebody
Right.
that's unethical. So for me, it was really difficult because I had to unpack, look, if you really want me to get you on the show, I can't make that happen for you. And so that was initially, but I was lucky because people did come my way because of that. But it was sort of a double-edged sword, because sometimes that was all they wanted and they wouldn't be the right fit. If they're literally looking pay to play to try to get you on a show that I have no control over, because that's not how it works. You don't pay to get on these shows. It doesn't. You have to be editorially chosen to be You have to be selected. You can't make it happen. So
Yeah.
can't
I could
force
see that
it.
happening.
Yeah. So that did happen
absolutely.
in the beginning. And from time to time, it kind of still does, but because there's still those opportunities out there, and still does make an impact when you're interviewed by Oprah. But that was sort of what got me that in the beginning. That was sort of a push and pull of what I was experiencing. And so I had to react to that. And so, yeah, I started consulting early on, and helping people sort of with their storytelling, figuring out how to package it for whether it was Oprah or just mainstream media for mass coverage.
Well, how did you decide like that was the right avenue? Was that what you were already doing inside the network, like helping them with their storytelling process?
Yeah. So as a producer, and a lot of the work that we do is helping shape content for the show, helping shape the story arc of how information will be shared over the hour of an episode. So what comes out
amazing.
first? Yeah, what's the first part of the story that you want to share? What's the part that's going to get people's attention in the beginning of the show and be interesting to the audience that we knew deeply? We knew the audience very well. So trying to determine the right arc of questions, the flow, working with the team, putting together the visuals, because there's often, visual storytelling that you're doing as well. So it's the expert or the guest or the author sort of weaving the story with them and helping them, coaching them in what parts to share, and, the passages of the book that are going to resonate, that we think are going to resonate. And the flow of the conversation and all of the visuals that accompany that. So if you're telling like a biography of a person, like for example, Maya Angelou, who passed away, of course, but her story, and she was on the show. She was such a mentor for Oprah. And so we would, when she had a new book, we would interview her and Oprah would interview her, and we would put together the storytelling of her life, or her, that chapter of her life where she wrote a memoir about her mother. And so we would tell her childhood story and visuals and put together stories, for example. So whoever it might be, like their biography. And so it's nice because you get to do a deep dive in all of these different lives of amazing public figures and learn about them and read all of their work, read every book they wrote. That was what was so amazing about that experience. And so, yes, that's a skill I developed over, I guess, almost 2 decades, because I always did work along those lines where you're helping people show up in the best way possible to share their story in a way that you believe will resonate. So, and doing the deep work to really know their whole body of work.
Oh, that's so incredibly cool.
Fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I love doing that. And I love finding the parts of people's stories that they might have overlooked, or the parts that they take for granted that they don't realize are really interesting, and really shaping those so that they could come out into the light. Like I love finding little details hidden in books and quotes and little moments that we can bring out into the light. So that's something that I've done in my work with clients.
That's so neat.
Since I started working for myself.
Yeah. Was it a difficult transition going into business for yourself?
In a lot of ways it was too, because I think I listened to too many voices that were telling me, giving me different advice. And I learned so much about who to listen to and how to filter that out. It's an ongoing journey for the type of personality that I have, because I think it's so different to receive a regular paycheck and do a job. And even if you love that job and it's amazing and an exciting job that you really care about deeply, it doesn't feel like a job. It feels like family. It feels like a passion, whatever it might be. It's still so completely different from when you're out on your own and you have to sort of hustle more and listen to the market and listen to what people want. So I would hear different feedback, for example, from venture capital firms that I would meet with. I thought initially that maybe I would want investors to build a business and what I could scale. I was doing research on how do you build a business. I read a lot of books and articles and talked to a lot of people early on. And I didn't fully yet know how to identify the people to listen to and who not to listen to. And so I think at times I know at times I listened to people that I didn't need to listen to. People who kind of guided me in a different direction that I did not need to go in. For example, at one point, because I came from a production background, producing content, I had received some advice that at the time, low-cost video would be appealing. People wanted to scale. They wanted to figure out a way to create a lot of videos at a low cost. And I thought I was advised by a venture capitalist that would be a market I could get into with my background. That would be, something that people would invest in, that venture capitalists might invest in. And so I started kind of pursuing it and building an MVP along those lines. And it really didn't make sense for me and my background and who I was and what I had done. I had worked in high cost video, not low cost, in intense, deep work that required a lot, required a large team oftentimes, not just, tech and scale. I wasn't built for that. That wasn't my background. And that wasn't what I was capable of doing, really. I was able to build an MVP that felt relatively successful, but it wasn't, and he didn't invest. The person who, wasn't prepared to invest, they're sort of giving you advice of what you should do to meet a market when they're not investing. So I learned a lot about who I should listen to.
Yeah.
And why I wasn't listening to myself. Well, I was listening to outside voices who were advising me who weren't necessarily, they didn't have stake in it.
Right. Oh my God, that is such good insight. I'm sitting here reflecting on things that I have also gone down different paths because I was listening to people and they didn't have skin in the game. They weren't investors, but they had knowledge that was relevant, but not at all, not exactly the same. And I don't know, it's just so interesting to hear you share that experience. How long did you work on the MVP?
This went on definitely for months. And I was sort of in a it's dorky to even talk about, but like a tech ecosystem basically at the time, which wasn't really the right fit for me either. It was amazing in a lot of ways. I met a lot of interesting people, but I'm not a tech founder. That's not who I found myself to be. I would say it was probably at least 6 months. At least maybe longer than that, where I built this MVP. I got into an accelerator, which is an amazing experience, but I was trying to build something that was not aligned to my vision or even really my expertise. And yes, of course, if you're a great builder, if you're a great leader, you can build something and take it to market. But I'm personally not made that way. I'm really purpose driven, and I have to be aligned with the vision of what I'm building. I have to feel like I have my skin in the game. Like I have to feel like this matters to me and like I care about this. And that is not something I cared about at all. And so that wasn't important to me. Scaling, I'm more interested in purpose. I'm interested in people feeling more connected to one another. I'm interested in content that helps people be a better version of themselves, a more connected, a more invested, a more alive version of who they are. That's what interests me. So I'm concerned about living the unlived life. Like I don't want my life to end and feel like I haven't done enough. And that's what I care about. I don't care about just scaling video content to flood the market with cheap video that you put no thought into. That is the last thing I want to do. I like quality over quantity. And so it really never aligned with who I am or what I'm built to do or what I care about. So I can't disentangle those things. I have to be aligned with the vision or else I can't really get behind it. I appreciate other people who can. I just can't.
Oh, no, I totally get it. How did you end up getting yourself into alignment, and how did you figure out what you wanted your offering to be? You had the first clients, and then that came first, right? And then you started going down this accelerator path and this different business model. And then did you shift back to your earlier vision? Like, how did that work out?
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't even think of that as an earlier. It's interesting because I think that, and this is where I erred, and initially what came to me was actually really good fit and really, I should have just stayed on that path. But I thought, I'm an entrepreneur. I need to build something. I need to make something big. And I think that was what I was going towards. I thought I need to really build a big company. I was thinking I wanted a big exit. I was thinking that it was all about, the financial gains too. But that came at a moral cost or an ethical or just even a cost of, personal cost of what I care about. So so it's been a journey, definitely. And also the pandemic came. And so this idea of producing video, we couldn't even produce anything in person. You had to do everything remote. And so that really forced me to pivot back to doing something totally different. So I was sort of in the middle of that when the pandemic took over and we couldn't be in person. We couldn't make video.
Wow.
We couldn't be with people. Everything was shut down. So, and we were sort of at the time in a production studio where we were working on this vision. So, yeah, so that helped me pivot. And then I started to really move in a good direction after that.
So what is your focus currently with your business?
Yeah. So now I'm focused primarily, I help individuals. So it tends to be women sort of 40s, 50s, and around that range who are working on sharing storytelling around their work. So they want to be more known for their work. They want to find their voice and share it. And sometimes they're working on very meaningful projects. They want to get out in the world. They might be working on a book. And so I do some storytelling coaching around that. Sometimes they're working on speaking engagements and I help them frame the story they're going to share. So what I do is help them uncover what's already within them and shape that into something that they can share with a larger audience. So it can be for talks, but it can also be for articles, essays. It can be their book. It can be also, I've worked with authors that their book is already out there in the world, but they want to make signature talks and keynotes and they want to, get out there in the world. Or they want to also just create content, and not just content, but stories that resonate with their ideal audience and connect with them. So I help individuals with that. I also work with organizations and offer trainings in storytelling, as well as object diaries workshops, which are sort of a way to connect with people through physical objects and using analog connection. an idea of a physical object as this conversation starter and an icebreaker so that you can share more of yourself among other people. So a variety of storytelling tools that I use to help people feel more connected and to be more themselves and be more, I guess, willing to share. So it tends to be that sort of, it can be of any generation, but oftentimes it's, people that are a little bit more reluctant to share or think that it could be cheesy or it could be overly promotional. But those are the people that I love to help.
It's difficult. It's so difficult. So, I mean, what you're doing is really solving a huge pain point, I think, just because so many people, including myself, it's so hard to know, like, what do you share? How do you share it? What's the right way to do it? And as you're talking about this, I'm thinking about two people that I know, one really personally, who has just published a book, and he hasn't made what his goal is, like 3,000 sales to start off with. He has not gotten there. And so I just wonder, like, I'm going to make a connection either way, just so you see if that would help him at all. But because what you're doing, it sounds like could be really valuable in that space.
Yeah. And it does take a lot of grit. Sometimes it just takes, showing up more and more and more and pushing. And that can be exhausting, but it is, writing a book now and marketing it. Those are two jobs. You have to market your own book. You have to write the book, but you also have to take on a pretty large lift of marketing your book to sell copies. So that is sort of the baseline expectation now when a book is published. So everyone needs sort of a thought partner to help them. And sometimes it's people that are working on a book too. They want help. So I do coaching in that regard and some ghostwriting too, helping people find their voice, shape it. And sometimes as we work together, as I ghostwrite with them, they start to hear their own voice more clearly and can do some of that on their own, which is the ideal, because I like to write myself out of a job and let them find their own voice. And so they can go on and be successful with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How has your life changed? Thank you very much, by the way, for that background. That's super helpful just to understand, like, where your focus is now after the iterations that you've been through. How has your life changed since you left your corporate role and you're doing Story Beat Studio full time?
How's my life changed? In so many ways. Yeah, it's really opened up. I feel like my whole life has opened up and I'm more of myself, more of who I could have been and was built to be, I guess. And so, yeah, I feel more like myself. And part of that's aging too. The age that I'm at, 49, to just feel more freedom. Don't worry as much about what people think. It's not about impressing anyone. It's really about what I can do for other people and being of service. So I've definitely had huge shifts in that. Just I lead a much fuller life in every possible way. And I'm much more just willing to sort of show up and be myself. So yeah, it's been a complete transformation in a lot of ways. And none of that would have happened also without my experience working for Oprah, where I got the opportunity to read and learn, read books by authors who changed my life. And I wouldn't have read those books if it hadn't been my job. I would have been completely closed to the idea. And so I've sort of been embodying a lot of what I learned during that time and actually living it. Versus I think when I was doing the job and reading the books, I was still such a type A. And I always will be sort of a type A, but I just didn't even really stop to soak it in. It's always so crazy busy. And not that I'm not busy now, I'm still really busy. I'm actually probably busier than I've ever been, but I soak in the moments. I'm grateful for every moment I have, the ability to work, the ability to support others, to give back and really build up others' careers and pour into them and give them the confidence to share their story and find their voice and to connect with other people and let themselves be seen, which isn't always safe or easy to do. But yeah, my life looks completely different. I have 2 kids. I have a dog, a cat, and now we're fostering another cat that I'm hoping to adopt. We're super busy, traveling, working full time, and trying to be a good parent all at once. Trying to show
I love
up.
that.
Not forget to pick up my kids on time.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I think the last time I talked with you, you had to go pick up one of your kids at something. It was school or I don't remember, but yeah.
Right.
Oh, camp maybe. It was camp.
Was it camp? Right. And that's so hard. The summer, I'm so privileged to be able to send kids to camp, but at the same time, it's like 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's good to have the flexibility.
Right. Exactly. I could have never, ever done any of that. And I tried, what I do is I just weave it all in, and I work after, when they're home, they do homework, I work, and I work at night after they go to bed. So I really have figured out a way. It's not fully successful. It's always a work in progress, but just trying to do all these different things. And it means that I don't sit around and watch Netflix at night, but I don't want to.
Yeah.
So I don't always know the latest show, but it allows me to be home sometimes in the afternoon. So I can be with my kids a little bit, and then I can go back and work afterwards.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you've been on this journey for a while, so it's not like it's an immediate change, but how did your income change from when you were in corporate versus kind of where you are at this point in your life? And what has that meant for you?
So income-wise, that was really the hard part, was realizing that I was responsible for that completely. Of course, when you do a job and you show up, but it's not like you're getting, I've thought about this, when you complete a task or you complete a report or you do a show, in my example, make a show, you don't receive, okay, you've reached this deliverable, you're paid for that. It's like you're getting a check weekly, right? And now it's very deliverable focused. It's like I really have to focus on, it's every deliverable. It's really the grit of making sure you're out there in the world and reminding people that you exist. And so all of that has been such a shift over the years, and just a different muscle I've had to build. And that was something I completely took for granted. The hustle, it's one thing to get a new job. It's like getting a new job every week, it feels like, because you're kind of like getting yourself out there, putting yourself out there. And so, yeah, that has been such an adjustment. Income wise, I have had years where I've made more. I've had years, and it's not always the same. So so income wise, but I created a situation for myself where I did well enough during my years, 20 years working, that I was able to put away money that allowed me some cushion there for the times when I wasn't, when I'm not able to, during the pandemic, for example, when things completely shifted. So yeah, but income wise, I've changed my goal. I used to think that the only success for entrepreneurial venture was 7 figures and up. And I just don't feel that way. I'm not a 7-figure business, and I don't want to be. And I really admire everyone else who says the same thing.
That's amazing. How did your mindset change? Like, how did that change come about?
With not worrying about being a 7-figure business? Yeah. I would say I've worked with a CFO. I worked with Trisha Tate, who's a CFO, and she's a fractional CFO. And then I did her program, and she really worked through the numbers of what do you actually need to make? What do you want to make to reach your goals? Wanting to be an angel investor, for example, wanting to give back. When I think about the things that I want to do that are important to me and how I can meet them, I don't need to be a 7-figure business to meet those goals, even though that's others set that up as the watermark of success. It's not necessarily for me. For me, it's more about impact than it is just about financial goals. So I'm more focused on impact, but I do also acknowledge that the financial piece is incredibly important when you're talking about investing in other women and investing in your own business and hiring people. But right now, I really prefer being a consultant, essentially being a solopreneur in an uncertain market. Very uncertain times when we don't know what to predict. So that allows me to be so much more nimble. So that's really where I'm at right now.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes so much sense. It is such an interesting time. You know that moment when you realize that you can't keep living the way that you've been living? You've probably heard several of my guests talk about that already. If that resonates with you and you're feeling like you're in that moment, you're in luck. I've created a 30-day program that's going to help you become unstuck, reconnect with your joy, reconnect with yourself, and reconnect with your values. We're going to work together to figure out your next step, your vision, and your path forward. This is an invitation for you to live the life of your dreams that truly lights you up. Visit 101waysout.com to get started. What's the most liberating decision that you've made since leaving the corporate world that you would never have been able to make before?
I just made this decision and just did this. So I have always, this is a secret dream of mine since I was a child, wanted to perform a puppet show in public.
What?
And I had always loved, Mr. Rogers was a big inspiration for me growing up. And I loved Fred Rogers. He is the reason why, at the core, why I went into the industry and why I became a storyteller for mass media, because of him and the potential for reaching people across the screen. And so I always loved puppetry and wanted to do something with it, but I thought it was so silly. I thought, talk about things that can't make money, but it can, but I had always wanted to do this. And so I'd been working with this amazing executive coach, JD Windack. And so I was working with her and we were working on my business and I kept talking to her about puppetry. She would say, okay, so what's our plan for this? And I would say, well, I have this goal. I want to do something with puppets. And it's like complete non sequitur. Why does this keep coming up? And she helped me identify that I really needed to get this done, that this was going to unlock other things in my life. So sort of having a bucket list thing that you're not doing. That for me, I was saying, this is this thing in the closet that I'm hiding, that I can't come to terms with. And I had to do it. So actually just a few days ago, I performed in public a puppet show that I wrote. And so I wrote the script. So I always love to write for others. And so this is really fun because I was able to write for puppets and they acted out a story actually about mansplaining. So it was for grownups. It was about the topic of mansplaining and a man who speaks over someone else, which that can be done by anybody of any gender, interrupting and talking over others. But it was a really fun piece. And I created a sort of a community and it was hosted by a local art gallery. And a lot of women came and one man. So it was a really amazing intergenerational community event coming together around this sort of physical analog lost art. And there's still definitely a living, breathing puppetry community across the country and world. But for me, it was something totally new and different that I had never done. So I'd always wanted to do and did it. So that is the most, I don't know if that's what you're looking for, but for me, that is the most liberating thing, to be a 49-year-old woman who's putting together a puppet show about mansplaining for grownups, serving wine.
Oh my gosh, Lisa. I love that so much. That is 100% unique. I've never heard anything like that. Like, that is so incredibly amazing. I want to see this puppet show so badly.
It's so cute. It's so fun. It's funny. And it's, I kept it really tight because I don't like people being bored. So it's only 7 minutes long. And, it's fun and funny. And I was able to channel the parts of myself that I am always so buttoned up. I'm always like a very buttoned up person, like very just contained. And the puppets are unhinged. They're kind of wacky and they just say and do inappropriate things. And that's so fun for me. So that's super liberating. And and just tying it back to business, doing that. And this is what my executive coach knew when she knew I had to do this. She said I was creatively constipated, which is true, because I wasn't able to do some, things that I wanted to do. And, having done it, it makes everything seem easier. So that next cold call or that next, hey, do you want to book an Object Diaries workshop? Do you want to, I have openings in October or November, it's so much easier to do when I've already done this completely wacky thing in public.
That's so cool.
Right?
Yeah, I would not have thought about that. It makes so much sense.
It's my version of jumping out of a plane or skydiving. It's my version of skydiving.
Nice. Well, and most people are, I think most people are more afraid of public speaking or doing something scary like that than they are of death, right? Like, at least there's a chunk of people that are. So what you did is probably scarier than skydiving for a lot of people.
That's so funny. Yeah. And the good part about it too is that I get to hide. So I get to put the puppets in front and I was still sort of hiding, but still I was public speaking. You're right. Absolutely. Yeah. And that I was totally terrified. I did not, when she suggested this idea and put it together and put it on the calendar and don't wait too long, I did not want to do it. I was looking for every reason to not do it. I mean, some people laughed when I told them. Some people laughed when I told them that I was going to do it. And I knew those are the people I'm not inviting.
Yeah.
Right. it just happened. Sometimes you get it wrong. You try to just invite the people are going to be like, yes, I'm all in for that. And so many people were. They're like, I'll be there. What time? I'm bringing 3 friends.
Oh my
And
God,
that
that's
was so
amazing.
validating too, to do something completely wacky and have people be like, yes. So that was
Oh my
very
God, I love it.
liberating.
Thank you for sharing that story. That is such a cool story.
Thank you.
Okay, I know we're getting close on time, so I am going to ask you, if you had to choose between happiness or success, which would you choose, and has your answer changed over time?
It has definitely changed. I would say that, and of course, it always depends on how you define success. But I think if you mean sort of career success, I would say that I've had career success and felt unhappy, and I've had unsuccessful moments in my career and still felt happy and still been able to find happiness. So for me, happiness is success.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
feeling happy is really important, and more contentment or fulfillment even than happiness. I think I would say, because I do sort of go back to what I learned working for Oprah, that happiness can be like a very empty thing. It can be sort of like sort of hedonistic approach, and that's not where I'm at. Yeah, I think that joy and fulfillment are more important than success as I used to define it, which was like accolades. Success was accolades, a lot of money, have your name known, those kinds of things. And like that those things don't always really make you happy. Sometimes they can make you really lonely and actually unfulfilled. So that's how I feel about it now. What do you think?
It's a funny thing. This question is something that actually came from when we were in high school. Because all of our friends, we used to go to coffee shops late at night and debate endlessly things that we just thought we were so intellectual, And so this happiness versus success thing was something that we would debate all the time when we were teens. And I think at that time, a lot of us were like, oh, happiness, happiness. But then as you get older, you get into the workforce, and you're so much what you're saying, you're chasing money, you're chasing title, you're chasing being known and respected. And so even though you might have at a younger point said happiness, it really does become all about success. And then you get, at least for me, I'll say, I got to these levels where I'm like, oh, I'm making over $100,000 a year. Wow, I never thought I'd do that. Oh, now I'm an executive. Wow, I never thought I'd do that. Wow, I have all this money. Oh my God, I never thought I'd what the hell? Why am I not happy? Why? It just doesn't provide happiness. And I think we're seeing that at large in our country, where no matter how much you have, how much some people have, it's never enough. And so for me, I think happiness is definitely the answer, because you have to have like the baseline level of be able to afford things and enjoy your time. But if you're just focused on accumulating money or accumulating things or accumulating whatever it is that you think you need to accumulate for a capitalistic society to show that you've made it, that's not going to actually make you happy. So for me, it's happiness. And I think what you said about contentment is so spot on. And I'm sitting here kind of reflecting, because I had this conversation maybe a month ago with somebody else, and we were talking about how contentment was never something that we strived for, and how we really want happiness, and we want to keep working, and we don't want to be content. But now, like a month later, I'm like, I've had a few other experiences where I'm like, actually, contentment sounds great. Just being content.
And that's not,
Yeah.
I'm still always striving. That's how I'm built. I'm always going to strive. I'm always pushing. What more can I extract from myself, to be useful during this time when I'm on this planet? I want to, I'm striving. So I'm not just sort of sitting or coasting or comfortable. But I think that I'm also appreciating the moments when I can say I have enough. I don't need more. I don't need to be greedy. I have enough, and grateful for that. It's more about what I can give back and what I can do that makes an impact on others, that I can lift up and help too. So that's really important. And raising kids that bring a lot, hopefully, to the world as well. So, but I don't think I know I couldn't have heard any of this when I was a kid, or when I was even earlier in my career. Whenever somebody said anything like this, I would sort of be like, yeah, that's you, but I don't want your life. I would think, yeah, that's great for you, not me. So you really almost can't tell anybody that this is a path, that this is a good path, that you kind of, maybe other people can learn from it, but I know I couldn't have heard it. And I heard it many times, but I didn't listen.
I hope so. I think people will. And I'll tell you, probably 10 years ago, I was working at this large company, and I had this what was it called? Mastermind group that a friend of mine who was a coach was leading. And it was free. She just pulled all these people together that she liked. And she was like, let's have this session. And we did it once a month. And there were like almost every single other person in this group, aside from me, had that mindset of, I don't need to like keep striving. I've got what I need. I'm good. And now I want to give back. And that's happiness for me and success for me. And I was not at that point, and I was like, what are they talking about? That's not me. I don't know if I'll ever be there. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. And now that's where I am. I'm like, oh my gosh. But I don't know if it would ever even have occurred to me that that was a possibility to think that way if I hadn't experienced what they shared. If that makes any sense. It kind of opened my eyes a little bit that there was some other way of thinking about things.
Absolutely. I love mastermind groups and listening to other people for that because everyone has their own perspective. Absolutely. Yeah. But I think it's like you can strive at the same time as wanting to, as being content. Like it's kind of like a push and pull because I personally just never want to be too comfortable.
Right.
I just don't. I like the discomfort because that's where growth lives. Right. So I like that.
What advice do you have for people who are trying to figure out what to do with their lives?
Yeah. Listen to yourself. Listen to yourself and listen to people you trust who have lived experiences that you admire. But that also doesn't mean don't listen to difficult feedback because I think sometimes, the approaches now are sort of filter that out, block that. Yeah. Don't listen to that. Remove that person from your life. But sometimes that means, listen to the tough feedback too from people who have lived experiences that you admire. And surround yourself with people that are willing to tell you the truth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but also give you advice that's not meant to harm you. Because there are people that will literally give us advice that is not consciously, but sort of unconsciously meant to harm us.
That's interesting.
Kind of
have you had that experience?
You back. Oh, 100%. Absolutely. And people don't do it consciously. They just say, oh, that didn't work for me, or that didn't work for my friend when they tried it. Right? Yeah. They failed. Their thing failed. You should do it this way, or you shouldn't do it, or you should get a job, or you should do this, like a lot of shoulds. And I think learning to listen to yourself, which is for me an endless battle. So I discovered that I'm porous. Like I have a tendency to be porous, to soak things in and take them in. And you have to kind of decide which ones to filter out sometimes. You can take in a little bit, but don't let it go deep.
Yeah, that's
right?
so true. It's so true. Oh my gosh, I feel like we're very similar in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How about, do you do that? I mean, what advice do you give for people trying to figure out what to do with their lives?
I'm a huge advocate of writing things down and planning and casting a vision. So you're turning 50, which I'm just I'm behind you a little bit, but I'm 45 now. And when I turned 40, I told my husband that the only thing I wanted for my birthday was for us to do this visioning workshop where we would look and say, where will we be in 10 years? Where do we want our lives to be? And so he put this whole little worksheet thing together, and we spent several hours just identifying over the last 10 years of our lives. And actually, take a step back, I have neighbors that live next door to me. I think they're both in their 80s now. And so they were a little bit younger back then. One was in their 80s, one was in their 70s. And they were, as we were kind of telling them, oh my gosh, it's a big birthday, it's a big milestone. They're like, oh, haha, you're so young. And we're like, yeah, well, it doesn't feel that way. And they said, well, don't forget that when you're starting to think about where you want to go, to appreciate where you've come from and what you've done. And so I thought that was really great insight. So my husband, Justin, put together this whole workshop for us to sit down and reflect on the highs and lows of the last 10 years in particular. And then we ended up taking several of the things that were the highs and lows and extrapolating that into the deeper meanings why, the deeper feelings around it, and then thinking about how do we take that forward to kind of mitigate the negatives and really highlight the positives and kind of push that even further. And so then we started drawing these pictures because drawing helps you think in a different way and connect different parts of your brain, as you know, from your creative side. So we started drawing these pictures of where we wanted to be and different aspects that we wanted to bring into our lives and things like that. And so that is something that I think was really, really helpful. And also at this time, our kid was very little. He was, it was 5 years ago. So he was 3, had just turned 3. And now obviously he's a full-fledged human being with his own interests and he can speak and communicate and everything. So, but at that point, we're like, what would he want? What do we think at this point he would want? And how do we cultivate all of those things for him? So that has really helped a ton in kind of guiding where we want to go and what we want to do. And we kind of revisit that same process, not every year, but fairly regularly. And at this milestone at 45, we just finished revising it again and seeing if we were on the right track. So to me, that's one of the ways.
Oh, I love that. I love having a process like that. And I bullet journal, and I love that process for clarifying my vision. I did vision boards with my husband, but I have never done a formal process like that. I love that as a family, the idea of doing that, because I've done it for myself, for my career, and for, using the bullet journal regularly. And then in working with a coach, I went through an entire process of identifying my values, which I think
I love that.
also really helps too, identifying the values that shape and guide, so that when you're listening to others, you kind of know, well, does that align with my integrity, my freedom,
Yes.
the impact, does that align? And you can kind of filter it through that too. So it's not just like, it's sort of like the Daniel Kahneman, like thinking fast and slow kind of concept. Like sometimes our gut reaction, like when I say listening to yourself, sometimes you might have a response that is based on fear, so you really have to listen deeply to yourself and to know. And so I love the rigor behind your process of really documenting it and writing it all down and having a very clear vision that you're continually updating. I think that's really inspiring. Did I hear that are you offering, is that something that's part of what you're doing on Leba?
Not
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah.
Oh, on Leva.
Leba.
No, but I think as I kind of figure out where I want to go with this whole storytelling process and 101 Ways Out, perhaps. But we'd have career coaches that we offer through Leva and all of that, but it's very different.
Okay. Yeah, because that's such an interesting thing that would be helpful, because Brene Brown sort of has her like family, her family manifesto or whatever, that she does, that she gave to, it's in one of her books. I can't remember which one, but sort of like writing the family kind of guiding principles, which I think is really cool. So I was wondering.
I
if you
love
had
that.
too. Yeah.
No, but I totally love that. I did recently have my family, everyone in the family, create their own vision. So now we have one family vision.
I love that.
It's crazy, man. It's crazy, but it has helped us a ton. And this year we just got back from like the Netherlands and Germany, because my kid wanted to see these musical instruments that he's really passionate about. And so we like let that guide our decision, because that was something that was like his main goal, was to focus more on this. So we did. So yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's
nice.
so beautiful. So he feels heard. Oh my gosh.
Right?
That's amazing.
Yes. As a parent, as a mom, isn't that so huge?
Huge.
And of course, as we think of our own experiences as children, like being heard, it's important. It doesn't always happen.
Oh, it can shape your whole life to feel heard. Actually, a friend of mine from college, my college roommate, told me that when she was a little girl and she was in the grocery store, her mother asked her which can to get. She's sort of like in the grocery store. She goes, "Which can should I get?" And she's a very decisive person. And she mentioned that to me as an example. And she's my generation. She was my college roommate. And she would say, yeah, that just really impacted her, that her mother gave her a choice when she was, 2 or 3 years old, which can.
Oh my God, I love that.
I love that too. Yeah. Yeah. And she felt that it shaped her, being asked and respected and given an opportunity to make a choice at a young age, even if it's just which can.
Yes.
So.
Oh my gosh, your opinion matters. I love that so much.
Well, thank you so much, Vanessa. Yeah. It was so nice. I hope that you got what you needed.
This was fantastic. Lisa, how can people find you? What's the best way?
Storybeatstudio.com is my service-based website, and then objectdiaries.com is my project connecting people to the objects that matter to us as a way to connect with other people.
Wonderful.
So that's objectdiaries.com. And I'm on LinkedIn. That's the only social media I use for now. Until I cancel that.
Yeah, right. No, I know. Right.
I'm going more towards just real in-person connection and really limiting social media as much as possible. But yeah, so the website's great. Either one of those websites, whatever resonates.
I love that. Thank you so very much. I really appreciate you sharing everything and your time.
Thank you. This was wonderful. Thank you so much, Vanessa. I really appreciate being included.
And that was my conversation with Lisa Weiss. It was fascinating to hear how she navigated the transition from the intense world of high-profile television to building a business that offers her freedom and control. I loved how she navigated the path to find the deep storytelling work that she was truly meant to do, and how listening to the wrong advice early on taught her to trust her own instincts. If you want to learn more about Lisa's work, you can find her at storybeatstudio.com. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of 101 Ways Out. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave us a review. It helps other people who are looking for their own way out to find the show. I'll see you next week. Until then, go rewrite the rules.